because I like solving problems, and math is really challenging, and most people don't like it because it's challenging, but I really like it. I also like technology. Technology is awesome. I'm on technology every day. I think most people are. And I like to see what's inside of technology or how it's made, everything around us. Most things around us are technology. Knowing that there are other girls that are interested in things I like and that there are a lot of girls out there makes me feel more comfortable being something like related to STEM, because they like know what it's like growing up with like more boys interested in STEM, science or stuff. And now later, I think when I grow up, I think there'll be more women in like STEM related jobs, and we're gonna take over.
We're doing a lot of cool experiments, and we can do a lot of things. It's really cool that it's just girls. I love energy, and I think it's been really cool. It's really cool how it can run through all these processes, and it just gets to your home, but it takes so much processes. Even water can even produce electricity. I didn't know that. And it's called hydro energy. I like astronauts because I like how space works, but I think I also like engineering. I like astronauts because you can discover space, more things about space. You could discover a new star. And the reason why I like engineering is because you can invent new stuff, and it's really cool.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. Can you hear me? If you give a thumbs up if you can hear me. Okay, great. We are so excited for tonight and to have you with us. This is the third of a series we've been doing. We've offered this parent club to the parents of project scientists, and tonight's the first time we're launching STEM sessions. So a little more of a sophisticated talk for anybody, not just parents. And couldn't be more excited to kick it off with Unladylike, the film series. I first heard about the film series, maybe a couple of months ago, and immediately went and watched one of the first films and fell in love. And since then, Kimberly and I have been working to get Unladylike to do a session with us. So I can't think of a better group to kick off our first STEM session than with this amazing group of women. So you're going to love the films, and we'll watch two of them during the session tonight, which is really exciting. I just want to mention who's on the call from Project Scientist. I have Kimberly Lewis. She's our outreach manager. And Pia is on as well. Grace Torres is on, and she's handling all the back-end technology for us. Thank goodness for Pia. I think a few of our board members have joined us tonight. Jenny, our board chair from Google, is on. And I think Stephanie, our board secretary, is on as well from Pricewaterhouse. And we have a few more. So we're expecting a lot of people to join us. And this is the largest group we've ever had. So bear with us. This is also the first time we're broadcasting on Facebook Live. So I'm very excited about that. So Charlotte is here. Charlotte is, I think, I want to come back as Charlotte in my next lifetime. She's worked with Nat Geo. She is the executive producer, writer, director of this series. She is a passionate supporter of women and girls, and just thrilled to have you here today, and your special guests as well, and to talk about your films.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for tuning in. So exciting. Should I introduce myself and the project?
That would be great.
Okay, so my name is Charlotte. I have been a documentary filmmaker for about 20 years. I started my career, like Sandy just said, at National Geographic Television, and then moved on to PBS, the public broadcasting system. And several years ago, I was with my two young boys at the Intrepid Museum, which if any of you are from New York, you would know. Oh, here's one of them popping in the screen. Here's Lucas. Sorry about that. And happened to be there. It's an Air and Space Museum in New York City on an old aircraft carrier. And we happened to be there on a day that a children's book author was doing a book launch. I don't know if you've ever heard of a story called Soar Eleanor, but we discovered this book about Eleanor Smith, who at the time that she was alive in the 1920s was the youngest licensed pilot in the world. She got her license at age 16. And the men at her airfield didn't believe that, quote, a girl could fly. And so they dared her to fly under a bridge. I don't know if you know, but this is the time when what was called barnstorming, all these crazy aerial stunts in these little rickety biplanes, was all the rage in America. So she flew under 4 bridges to really prove herself to them, all 4 bridges along the East River in New York. And then went on to be a test pilot, broke a number of world records. Late in her career, worked for NASA on flight simulators. And I was just in awe and so inspired by this story, but also really frustrated. Why have I never heard of Eleanor Smith? I thought there was only Amelia Earhart, right? She's the only woman aviator you tend to hear about. So I started to research Eleanor, and she led me to other women in aviation, and they led me to women in science and all these other fields. And I just uncovered this treasure trove of stories of women in US history whose stories don't get told. And that became what is now known as Unladylike 2020, which we ended up choosing 26 of the women as to make 10-minute biographies. And 4 of them are women in STEM. And I think we're going to watch 2 of the films now. And I'm so lucky to be joined by 2 of the women who I interviewed for these 2 films. Ina Vanderbroek, who is a botanist. She studies plants and how humans interact with plants at the New York Botanical Garden. And Wendy Friedman, who is an astronomer and is actually the person who measured the sorry, Wendy, if I get this wrong, but how old the universe is. Can you believe that? So you have 2 incredible scientists to help guide you in your own STEM research. And without further ado, I think, which of the 2 are we watching first? I think the botanist. So you're about to see the story of Inez Mejia, who was the first Mexican-American botanist.
Thank you. Let me start the video.
Well, maybe until it starts, should I keep talking? Keep people engaged? Oh, it worked. Okay, great.
She's the most accomplished female plant collector of her time, and she did not start until she was 55 years old.
They say I don't act right, it's only 1929 Brazil. 59-year-old Inez Mejia undertook the greatest adventure of her career, a 2.5-year expedition traveling 3,000 miles up the Amazon River by steamship and canoe.
She went out collecting by herself with a guide because she realized that you can't go off into the wilderness totally by yourself because you don't know the terrain. Of course, being fluent Spanish, she can talk to all these guides. And it was interesting because she'd teach her guides how to do some of the pressing.
After more than 2 years in the wilds of South America, I find myself longing for a nice, quiet jungle again.
Inez Enriqueta Julieta Mejia was born in 1870 in Washington, D.C., where her Mexican father was stationed as a diplomat. At 1 year old, she moved to Mexia, Texas, a town founded by her ancestors.
Inez was very shy, very quiet, liked to keep to herself, read a lot of books. Her parents separated when Inez was 9 and immediately put her into a private boarding school. And so Inez's early life was probably very painful because she just was all by herself.
After finishing her studies, Mejia considered entering a convent. But in 1896, her dying father asked her to take over his business in Mexico.
He has a huge ranch. He's quite wealthy. She takes over the managing of the ranch and becomes very adept.
Mejia married twice. Her first husband died after a long illness. Her second bankrupted the ranch.
And at that point, it's just too hard on her. She literally goes into bed and crawls up in a fetus position. It's a mental and a physical breakdown.
In 1909, Mejia moved to San Francisco to seek medical help from Dr. Philip King Brown.
He was a psychiatrist. That was a very new field in 1909. He became the father figure that she never had.
Mejia remained under Dr. Brown's care for 10 years. At his encouragement, she joined California's budding environmental movement.
She became a valuable part of the Sierra Club and Save the Redwoods League on the forefront of fighting for the national parks.
I have been much distressed to hear cutting has been going on in Montgomery Grove. I'm heartily in sympathy with any effort to save these trees.
This shy woman joins this outgoing club with excursions to the Redwoods and excursions to Yosemite and camping out and going on hikes, and she just loves it.
Mejia decided to pursue science and natural history courses at UC Berkeley.
This is 1921. No woman goes back to college at 51 years old, but she did. And she discovered botany. Suddenly, here was the life goal that she had never realized before that she would have, and she loved collecting plants.
I have a job where I produce something real and lasting.
Women were to be confined to the kitchen, the garden, and the baby room. So botany was more acceptable for women scientists because it's a logical extension of women being caretakers. My name is Ina van der Broek. I'm an ethnobotanist at the New York Botanical Garden. Plants are really the essence of human life. Without plants, we do not have oxygen. Without plants, we do not have food. And at least 1 in 4 of our medicines is made from plants.
In 1925, Mejia took her first plant collecting trip to Mexico on a group expedition sponsored by Stanford University. But she soon realized she could be more productive alone. She secured funding from several natural history institutions willing to pay her 20 cents per specimen.
56 years old, and never stopped after that. She went into Mazatlan and then into the Sierra Madre Mountains.
My dryers get all filled up, and still numberless plants sit and look at me and announce that they're waiting to be collected. It is terribly trying to a greedy collector like myself.
Her trip didn't end exactly as she had planned because she saw a plant, reached over to get it, and fell down a cliff and got a few ribs broken and I think an arm.
Nonetheless, the expedition resulted in 500 plant specimens. One of them, Mehianthus mexicanus, became the first of many named in her honor. Mejia's reputation as the first Mexican-American female botanist grew, and botanical institutions around the U.S. sponsored her expeditions. For the next 12 years, Mejia collected plants across North and South America, from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego.
A well-known collector and explorer stated very positively that it was impossible for a woman to travel alone in Latin America. Well, why not? I decided to make my way right across it.
Inez very much did what botanists are doing now, minus the technological developments like DNA analysis. Collecting plants, naming them, describing them, classifying them, which is the basic building block of all biodiversity science. 1/3 of all the 450,000 estimated flowering plants that exist on Earth are under threat of extinction. There's urgency to protecting that plant diversity because we need them for our survival.
On her last expedition in Mexico in 1938, Mejia became sick and was soon diagnosed with lung cancer. She died a few months later at age 68, leaving much of her estate to the Sierra Club and the Save the Redwoods League. In a 13-year career, she collected more than 145,000 specimens.
A new genus was named for her, and then she had 50 other new species named after her, plus 500 other discoveries.
Over the last 3 decades, there has been a lot of talk about including women in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and maths, and progress has been made, but we still have a long way to go. Especially the representation of women from immigrant communities and women of color in science to be in leadership roles, be recognized for their contributions.
In all of my travels, I've never been attacked by a wild animal, lost my way, or caught a disease. I don't think there's any place in the world where a woman can't venture.
So great. I failed to mention at the beginning to please, I know we have a lot of questions, especially from our girl scientists that are on the Zoom tonight, to send your questions through the chat box. And then at the end, we'll open it up for questions and Pia will help moderate that. So, it's such an honor to have you here live on the Zoom as well. So honored to have you here.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here too. Surrounded by a wonderful group of women and future scientists.
Right. So we wanted to now let both of you sort of talk about the experience of making the film, and Inez, and just anything you'd like to share for like the next 5-10 minutes.
Sure. Well, I guess I'll start by saying that from the very beginning with the project, we wanted to make sure that it would appeal to kids. So that's why we included all that animation and color, because we thought, black and white, old black and white photography might seem a little boring to kids these days. So we made a decision early on to try to make it really come to life and color with the animation. So I hope you enjoyed that. And we also wanted to make sure that the history felt alive today, which is why we made the choice also to interview modern day scientists who could really show you how they're walking in the footsteps of these women from the past. So that's why I got the chance to meet these two amazing scientists in the course of making the film. But I mean, as you can imagine, it was years of research, digging through archives. In the case of Inez Mejia, there's been one biography written about her. So by Derlin Anima, who's the biographer that we interviewed. So there was really just one main resource to pull from. Because again, these are often stories that are little known or didn't really survive in our history books. And we went out of our way to tell them.
Yeah, Charlotte, if I can add something to that. I mean, I'm a botanist, I'm an ethnobotanist actually, so studying people and plants. But I didn't know about Ines Mejia or Mexia and her incredible story. And it's something that needs to, you know, come more to the forefront. And I think you did an incredible job. I think these short documentaries are accessible to all age groups. And these are stories that are really, really important to tell. So I thank you. I'm honored. I mean, I at the beginning, and I wrote a blog about that, I actually felt kind of intimidated when I read up. I got to know Ines Mexia through, you know, Googling, and I felt intimidated. I didn't feel like I was in her, you know, that I was measuring up to her stature, to her accomplishments, to like I feel like a small child in comparison with this huge heroine. That's what she is. And these stories, they are so incredible and they need to be told. And I thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
And I love she was 51 when she started, you know, into all of this. And, you know, the title of your film's Unladylike. For those of us, you know, for our girls, we want them to aspire to be, you know, what they want to be. But also, it's not too late for us women, too.
That's right. Yes, you can have mid-career changes for sure at any age. Yeah, and we mean unladylike as in, you know, bold and not necessarily going along with what the status quo or what society expects of you. And yeah, following your dreams.
Yeah,
with no apologies.
I think it's so wonderful, and that the message is it's never too late to start a career in botany in the case of Ines Mexia. And that's a wonderful message. And all that she accomplished in such short time. And I think she was collecting until the end of her life. She was literally, when she was about to be diagnosed with cancer, she was collecting plants in Mexico, I believe. And she had to like return from an expedition. And I think you feel that urgency, and that's something that I share, an urgency to describe that biodiversity, to protect that biodiversity also. I think she's not only a botanist, but she's also a conservationist. And that is so important, this conservation of plant diversity and of biological diversity. There is so much urgency to that today. And we really need a lot more women in botany. So this is a call to everybody who likes to know more and learn more about plants. This is a scientific discipline that will never get boring. And I personally, I don't want to stop going into the field and collect plants and find out how other communities, other people, other cultures use these plants. There is so much there that we should not lose, that is so precious for all of humanity.
Well, last summer, after our summer academy, which we serve girls ages 4 to 12 academy, we sent a survey asking what they'd like to learn for this upcoming summer. And I'll tell you, climate change was top of the list, and the environment. So I know that this speaks to their heart, and to hear, you know, how botany relates to that study is important.
Ina, could you describe what ethnobotany involves, what your day-to-day research entails?
So as a scientist, it depends on whether I'm in the field, right? If I'm doing, a field study, or if I'm in the lab, which is all the maybe not so, I wouldn't call it sexy, but there is also an importance of analyzing the data. But if we start in the field, for example, I'm working now in Jamaica. My specialty is Caribbean ethnobotany, and ethno is people, botany is plants, and it's about how communities perceive plants, their knowledge about plants, how they use plants, how they manage plants, also how they protect plants. So the Caribbean is the region where I'm specializing in, and I have a real passion about that too. And then I also collaborate with Caribbean and Latino immigrant communities in New York City, because we often think that plant knowledge is something from the forest, but it can also be something in the urban environment, because people bring their plants with them because they're important for their culture, in their culture, as medicines or as foods. But to answer your question, Charlotte, when I'm in the field, and this is not something, I don't arrive in a community and I say, oh, hi, I want to study the plants that you know and use. It's a long process of building relationships, of explaining about my research, and asking people if they're willing to collaborate with me as a scientist. So it's a partnership. I'm not studying people, I'm studying people's use of plants as medicines, as foods, to build shelter, all kinds of different uses that you can imagine. But these people are my wise teachers. They are my professors. They may not have a degree, but they're my professors. So when we go out into the field, and it's on hikes, and I let those wise people, those professors, lead me, and they will point out plants that are important to them. And then I make a collection so that this plant can be pressed and dried and preserved in the herbarium, like you saw in the video, the dried plant specimens of Ines Mexia. But then when I go back into the community, I'm showing this plant to a lot of people, and ask them to tell me what their personal view of the use of that plant is. So that's all the data I collect. So it's thousands of reports of uses of plants. And then when I'm back in the laboratory or in my office space, I identify those plants so that I know the scientific name, not only the name, the common name. And I also analyze all that ethnobotanical data about uses of these plants. And then we write papers about it. We return the results to the communities as community guidebooks, because again, this partnership is very important.
Beautiful. And when did you know you wanted to become a scientist, and how did you choose this field?
Always. I have pictures of myself as a little girl. I couldn't even walk properly, and I have this daisy in my hand. I was always crazy about nature. I had a rabbit and I was cultivating carrots for the rabbit and salad. And then I had a girlfriend when I was about 11 or 12 years old. And we had a competition. And our competition was drying the most beautiful plants. So it was already in my, I almost want to say my DNA, but it was just something that I was born with, that love for plants, for the environment, for cultures also. I also loved language. And that was actually for me very, I had to choose. I love poetry, I love language, I love science. And ultimately, I chose for science because I think that was something that I was doing as a little girl and that I felt very comfortable with. But I still read poetry.
That's
We're-
great.
Thank you so much. Before we get into the next film, we're going to play a short video on Project Scientist, just for those that are on that want to be the future Dr. Vanderbroek or create films about women in science. We have our STEM Academy this summer. We're going virtual. So unfortunately, we won't see all of you in person, but we will see you via Zoom. So we wanted to just play a quick video about the summer program to get all of you informed about what we're doing, and hopefully we can see you this summer. And then we'll move on to the next film.
Experience of serving girls on campuses like Caltech and USC. We know what girls need to gain confidence and build interest in science, technology, engineering, and math. And through pre- and post-evaluations, Harvard Medical School have proven girls leave Project Scientist with a greater understanding of and confidence in STEM careers and STEM majors. Our 6-week virtual lab includes weekly themes focusing on subjects like climate change, DNA and health, and aerospace engineering. Each week, girls will receive a science kit delivered right to their door with all of the supplies needed for the week. Parents will be relieved to have our credentialed teachers and high-profile STEM companies entertain and educate their girls from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. daily. Campers will begin each day with a STEM superstar, a female professional from the field. Girls will witness live, hands-on demonstrations and get an in-depth glimpse into a variety of careers. By 10 a.m., we will get our blood flowing with a kid-focused yoga class. Following yoga, we will transition to hands-on science in virtual classrooms with credentialed teachers and no more than 25 girls per class. Staying in these small classrooms, girls will then have lunch with a scientist, allowing for an intimate lunch with a leader in the field to ask questions and learn about her path to success. Twice a week, girls will experience a virtual expedition to see behind the scenes of companies on the front lines of COVID-19, leaders in AI and robotics and tech. And each night, the entire family will tune in for a nationwide trivia game based on all she learned that day, challenging your family to, are you smarter than Project Scientist? Finally, parents are invited to an invitation-only bi-weekly STEM chat with companies and experts in the field, allowing parents to gain insights into careers and critical learning their daughter experienced during the week. Going virtual is not what we expected for summer 2020. Still, we are excited to bring a fun and educational option to your family that builds on your daughter's STEM interests, increases her confidence in her abilities, and provides parents with a consistent 3-hour break each day.
Thank you, Pia. So we would love to have you all join us this summer. If you use the code SANDY10, S-A-N-D-Y 10, you'll get 10% off, and Kimberly's going to send an email after with links and all that you need to know. But we have some exciting themes, and Ina and Charlotte, we'd love to have you be STEM superstars this summer as well, and entertain our girls, and Wendy as well. So I'll turn it over to you, Charlotte, to introduce the next film.
Hi. This is my son, Lucas. So the next film is about an astronomer named Wilhelmina Fleming, who in the late 19th century started off working as a maid for the man who ran the observatory at Harvard University, and ended up basically leading the team of women researchers there, and helped classify over 10,000 stars, discovered many different and has really left a mark in the field of astronomy. And we were very lucky to interview Wendy Friedman, who, as I mentioned, among many other accomplishments, has measured the time during which this universe has existed. So incredible. She's also led many different telescopes around the world, and I can't wait for you to hear from her. So without further ado, Wilhelmina Fleming.
She was a true star. It was the dawn of astrophysics, and she had a hand in it and in discoveries that still matter today. They say I don't act right, it's unladylike, how I wanna live my life.
1900 Washington, Georgia. 43-year-old astronomer Wilhelmina Fleming traveled from Boston to experience her first solar eclipse.
They took a steamship and traveled by rail. It was a major undertaking. And the amount of equipment that they would have carted along, telescopes, clocks, photographic supplies.
I shall always be glad that I have seen a total solar eclipse, simply as a spectacle. It is magnificent.
Wilhelmina Patton Fleming was born in 1857 in Dundee, Scotland. After her father died, Fleming started working as a teacher's assistant at age 14 to support her family. In 1878, at age 21, Fleming emigrated with her husband to Boston, Massachusetts.
Unfortunately, there isn't much known about her husband. Some sources say he died. Some say he abandoned her, but she was pregnant. So that put her in a desperate situation, which explains why she would take a domestic servant's job.
Fleming became a maid at the home of Edward Charles Pickering, director of the Harvard Observatory.
But the Pickerings, recognizing her intelligence, moved her into the observatory and taught her how to analyze photographs of the heavens. They took long exposure photographs of the sky through the telescope, and stars appeared on the film that no one had ever seen. Observatories had traditionally been about ascertaining the positions of the heavenly bodies, but he was after the physics of the stars. What are they made of? Why do they look different? Questions that for a long time had seemed unanswerable.
To support his new approach to astronomy, Pickering did something highly unusual. He hired women.
When he arrived at the observatory, he found several women already working there as computers to calculate the actual positions of stars. And Pickering saw an advantage to it because women were cheaper than men and didn't need any advanced education to do the jobs given to them. None of the women at first ever used the telescopes. They just had to be good at math and willing.
In many things, women's patience, perseverance, and method make her man's superior. Let us hope that in astronomy, she may prove herself his equal.
Some women dared to harbor dreams of working in science, but they had a very hard time. Several of the women's colleges were just being founded, but there was active objection to higher education for women. Some people thought they weren't capable of it. Others thought it was harmful to women.
It was felt that women didn't have the strength, the stamina to go out to telescopes and do observing, so they couldn't possibly be actual professional astronomers, but they turned out to be really gifted scientists in their own right. My name is Wendy Friedman, and I'm an astronomer on the faculty at the University of Chicago. When I started out, there was a big debate about how old the universe was. Is the universe 10 billion years old, or is it 20 billion years old? I'm known for resolving this debate, making a measurement of the universe, which is about 13.7 billion years. Over the course of my career, I've seen a lot of changes, from the development of high-speed computing to new telescopes to new instruments. I actually started out in the era where we used photographic plates in the same way as Wilhelmina Fleming.
In 1890, Pickering published a new catalogue of stars. Fleming personally classified some 10,000 of them.
Astronomers at the time were interested in taking spectra, that is, dispersing the light of a star into a rainbow, and making maps of the entire visible universe. So what Wilhelmina Fleming did was to look at the spectra on these photographic plates and recognizing that there were patterns.
A great many women must have a similar aptitude for astronomy, and if granted similar opportunities, would undoubtedly devote themselves to the work with the same untiring zeal, and thus greatly increase our knowledge of the stars.
In 1899, after almost 20 years at the observatory, Fleming was promoted to curator of astronomical photographs, the first woman to ever hold a Harvard University title.
She became the supervisor of about 15 other women at a premier astronomy observatory. It's unprecedented, it's surprising even now that it happened. And they were doing real foundational science.
In 1893, Fleming published an article in the journal Astronomy and Astrophysics advocating for more women to work in the field. She also protested the unequal pay women were receiving.
They worked 6 days a week, and they made about 25 cents an hour. Men in similar positions were making far more than she was. So she complained about it, but she didn't get very far.
I had some conversation with the director regarding women's salaries. He seems to think no work is too much or too hard for me, no matter what the responsibility or how long the hours. Does he ever think that I have a home to keep and a family to take care of as well as the men? And this is considered an enlightened age.
When I first started observing at the Palomar telescope in Southern California, women had been told you can't observe because there are no restrooms for women. For much of my career, I've been the only woman in the room. But I've had many opportunities to lead a major observatory, to lead this major project with the Hubble Space Telescope, the project to build the giant Magellan telescope, which will be an 80-foot diameter optical telescope in the Andes Mountains in Chile.
One of the first women admitted to the Royal Astronomical Society, Fleming also won medals for her achievements. In her 30-year career, she discovered 10 novae, 310 variable stars, and 59 gaseous nebulae, including the iconic Horsehead Nebula. Fleming also recognized the existence of Earth-sized stars, later named white dwarfs. As a single mom, having put her son through MIT, she later died of pneumonia in 1911 at the age of 54.
The glass plates at Harvard are a unique and irreplaceable record of 100 years of the night sky. They're still used, and they're important enough that they're all being digitized so that astronomers can access them from anywhere.
to this day, we rely on the discoveries that were made by these women early on. Wilhelmina Fleming's life is very inspiring. She persisted despite real difficulties, opened the doors for women of today.
Women who have taken up any branch of science need not be discouraged, even if others refuse to give credit to their work. Labor honestly, conscientiously, and steadily, and recognition and success must crown your efforts in the end.
That's inspiring, yet seeing some of the struggles she went through and what we still have today, especially now. It's a little, we've come a long ways, but there's a long ways to go.
Yes. And again, that's part of what I wanted each of these films to do, is sort of take stock of how far we've come, but also what remains to be done in these fields. And what Wendy could speak much more eloquently than me about the struggles that she has faced. I mean, your story about being told you can't work at this telescope because there are no bathrooms for women is just so shocking. Yeah, so Wendy, if you could just take the floor a little bit, I'm sure all the kids would love to learn about what you do.
Let me say first, I'm delighted to be part of this, and I want to speak to the young people here too, because I feel really fortunate to have had the career that I've had, and I saw the opening scene. And you can do anything, and I hope if you have an interest in STEM that you will follow your hearts, because there's nothing more enjoyable. And I want to say this series has been amazing, and for you to have found all these women who were had untold stories, I think this is just marvelous. So
thank you so much.
Yeah, we have a long way to go. We've come a long way, and I did encounter earlier in my career strange things that women were not being encouraged to go into astronomy, and yet people like Wilhelmina Fleming, because they did what they did and they were so good at it, eventually started open doors. So I feel tremendously grateful to the women who came before me, and as I said, I've been really extraordinarily lucky to have been able to go to major observatories, climb up in prime focus cages of telescopes to do my research, travel to places like 14,000 foot mountains in Hawaii and the Andes Mountains in Chile, and use the Hubble Space Telescope and direct this, what will be the largest optical telescope in the world, direct that project for 12 years. And yeah, before I started, when I arrived in Pasadena, California, which was where the large optical telescopes were, women had been told just ahead of me they couldn't use the telescopes because there were no bathroom facilities on the mountain. And I don't know if you can think of anything more ridiculous. It's just airplanes figured out you could just put a sign on the door that says, restroom, and anybody can use it, but somehow that escaped people on the mountain, and they were told they couldn't have jobs either, and those jobs were not given to women. So I was very fortunate to come along just at the time when that was starting to change, and I got to use those telescopes. And many more women are entering the field now, and I think it's a much more encouraging place than when I came in. So again, I want to say to the young people who are listening, if you have an interest in science, follow your dreams, because I think if you do something in life that you don't enjoy, nothing is more painful. But if you do something that you do enjoy, I think nothing gives you more pleasure. So I would have loved to have participated in a summer project too, like Project Scientist. It sounds wonderful. So, and I'm really happy to answer any questions. So please don't be shy. Speak up if you have any questions at all.
Charlotte, do you want us to, I think we have 4 questions in the queue. Do you want us to start?
Yeah, let's do it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. So we have, so the first one was, which story was your favorite or resonated most with you in your career?
Oh, that's like asking me, who's my favorite son or something. It's hard for me to choose. They're all extraordinary in their own way. I think I would say that the one that maybe of all of them I find has the most resilience and is just so admirable is a woman named Zitkala Shaw, who was born on the Yankton Sioux Reservation in South Dakota. She was Native American, and she was one of the tens of thousands of Native American children who were taken from their homes on the reservations and forced to attend these boarding schools where they were essentially Americanized, stripped of their Native heritage, not allowed to speak their native languages, converted to Christianity, taught English, and she ended up using that knowledge of English and of the white man's world to advocate for Native American rights, and is instrumental in what became the 1924 Indian Citizenship Act, which actually gave American Indians citizenship in the US for the first time, and which then led to voting rights, et cetera. So, and on top of that was an extraordinary author who wrote about the trauma of the boarding school experience, was a musician who composed what's known as the first Native American opera. So just talented on so many levels, but especially this resilience of having overcome this traumatic childhood and been able to use it to do good and to fight for other people's rights is, wow. Hats off.
Awesome, thank you.
And her episode is coming out in August.
Ooh,
so you can catch it and all of our other episodes on our website, unladylike2020.com, as well as on PBS.
And you all have a ton of resources as well to go with the films that we're working on the side with you all on a potential project to launch in the fall. But I want to encourage everybody on the Zoom tonight to tell your schools and even as parents.
Yes, there's curriculum, there's timelines, there's a lot of additional context to learn about.
Yay.
Yeah. And no better time than the present. They're sort of tailor-made for homeschooling.
Absolutely.
Sadly, but yes.
Okay, great. Our next question is for Ina. How did you get into ethnobotany? How did you hear that ethnobotany was a thing to study?
Well, so actually, when I studied biology, but then I kind of got enrolled into a PhD that was about studying neuropsychopharmacology, which is something completely different. And I always say the most important result of my PhD that came out was that I decided I didn't want to be a lab scientist. I really, I felt neuropsychopharmacology was so narrowly focused on certain brain circuits and I wanted that link with real life, being out in the field. So I entered into a moment of crisis after my PhD. So I said, what do I really like? Right? So that was biology, and it was botany and plants, and it was medicine, because through the neuropsychopharmacology link, I was connected with medicine. And when I brought these two together, ethnobotany, the study of the use of plants by people, is often about their use of medicinal plants for treating themselves on a community level, because a lot of communities are poor, they don't have the resources, and they have this rich tradition of using medicinal plants. So I just put those two together, and there were moments of crisis and a lot of moments of doubts, but it all, in the end, it all fit together. And I think that's also a message to our audience. Don't be discouraged. Your path, if it's not clear from the beginning, that is okay. You can really take your time in a way, and navigate, because of course science is so complicated.
Thank you. That's a very important point to share, that everyone's paths are so different, and we need to understand that there's so many things that we need to explore before we just go towards our goals. So thank you. Our next question is for Wendy. Being the only woman throughout your industry for a long time, can you share with the younger girls on our call how you had the motivation and determination to continue?
I really didn't think about it, if that makes any sense or not. I loved astronomy, and I had a very supportive family. I will say that, and I think undoubtedly that was a huge reason for my success. That nothing is completely simple, and you do run into hurdles and disappointments and struggles that you didn't realize you were going to encounter. And my parents always said to me, do what you love to do. And if you do good work, then you will succeed. And so I think, and it's not as if I didn't encounter things that weren't, egregious kinds of things that I think today young women don't have to put up with. But my choice was to almost pretend that I didn't encounter it, and find a way to get around the obstacle, and keep doing what I love to do. And I think it worked. I think in the end, I have been able to do pretty much everything that I have wanted to do. And in the process of doing that, I think I also was able, I eventually became the director of a major observatory, which again was something that women had not been allowed to do in previous generations. And so I could actually be a person who changed the policy. So for example, when I got pregnant, and I was the first woman to ever be hired at the observatory in Pasadena, there was no policy for, they'd never hired a woman before, so there was certainly no policy for parental leave. And they told me, the business manager said, if you don't come back to work in 6 weeks, you'll lose your job. And I was supposed to sign a form. So I just didn't sign the form. I pretended it just seemed ridiculous to me. And I told somebody else, an older male colleague of mine, and he agreed that, that I shouldn't have to sign something like that. But then when I became director, I could put in a policy for men and women. And so I guess my advice is really do what you love to do, work hard at it, and find a way to change things. And I think this generation has an opportunity to do things in a way that earlier generations did not, and you really can continue the changes. And I wish you every success in that, because I think the time is right.
Thank you so much for that. It's very inspiring. So we have,
and so I'd add just one thing: is don't get discouraged by things that seem to be roadblocks, because that's part of life. And I said that to my kids growing up. I mean, life is an obstacle course, and you have to go around the obstacles. And if you just go head bang on the first obstacle that you see, you don't get any farther. So if you navigate, look at it as it is an obstacle course, then you don't get discouraged. I think it helps.
Yeah. And this actually leads into our next question. How do or did you respond to challenges like, you can't do this because?
Who's that for?
This is for all of you.
All of us. Wendy, go ahead. You start, since you have the floor.
Yeah, well, so I'm thinking of an example in grade 10 physics class. The my high school physics teacher would say, he'd start to describe something that was more complicated, and he'd say, the girls don't have to listen to this. And my response in my head was, who says? Just, again, ignore it. That's a ridiculous statement, and I'm just going to do it because I like to do this, and it's so interesting to me. Who, why would anybody tell me not to do it? So yeah, if someone tells me I can't do something, maybe it makes me want to do it all the more.
Yeah.
Ina?
I think I really want to echo what Wendy said. If I want to do something, nobody's going to stop me. I'm really defiantly going at it, and willing also to fall on my nose if need be, and pick yourself up and dust yourself off, and just do it. Just go for it. It's, if you think it's important, it is important.
When I first undertook this project, I got a lot of no's, a lot of mainly men in positions of power at television stations saying, who cares about this history? Unsung women, like, is there an audience for this? So I got turned down in a lot of places, and I just didn't let it stop me. I knew that there was something here and that I was going to find a way. And it took years of fundraising and just not giving up. But I haven't always been this persistent, ambitious person. I actually grew up with very low self-esteem. I had an eating disorder growing up. I had a fairly unhappy childhood, and it's taken me years to climb out of that and stop apologizing for who I am. And, I finally have the self-esteem and the respect to know that I matter and I belong, and the stories I tell matter. And so, I wasn't born with that same, go get 'em personality that it sounds like Ina and Wendy have, but I have taught it to myself along the way.
What an inspiring story.
Thank you.
And yes, these stories do matter, and I'm so glad you persisted. There are a lot of untold stories. It's that's wonderful.
Thank you. My hope now is we can raise money for a season 2, because there's hundreds of other women's stories that need to be told.
And on that note, when you go to watch the videos, there's videos beyond scientists. So
yes, if you're interested in the arts, in politics and activism, in music, there's so many different women. We really went out of our way to choose a diversity of professions, of racial ethnic background, of geographical origins. So there may even be a woman from your hometown. So yeah, please explore and spread the word. Tell all your friends.
I think Pia has 2 more questions. Is that right, Pia?
Yes, I do.
It's 5:34. I know we are going to end at 5:30. I'm hoping you can all stay on for 2 more questions, and then we'll close it out.
Yeah. Okay. So the next question is, how did all of you feel about reading written words from the late 1800s that reminds us all of the fairness or equality struggle for women to present day, such as salary parity, being seen as equal, and the continued hill we all climb as a gender? And what is your hope for the future?
Yes, well, so part of how we selected the women that we featured was that it was very important to us that we be able to give them their voice back. So we really went out of our way to find letters, diaries, interviews that they gave to the press when they were alive, and have those voiced by actresses or other women today. And you're right, so many of them at a time when, women could be arrested for wearing pants in public in some parts of America, let alone, certainly they could not vote or run for office. They had just earned the right to get a divorce or have custody of their children. Married women, there were laws in many states, married women could not work. You were expected to be home caring for your husband and your children. So there was a huge taboo against women even being in the workplace. And yet these women were fighting for equal pay, for equal work, which we still are fighting for 100 years later. So they were very forward thinking and so bold. And I'm getting a question. What is the website again? So I'll say it again out loud for everybody. Unladylike2020.com. And the 2020 is because this year is the centennial of women's suffrage. So women won the right to vote exactly 100 years ago. The 19th Amendment of the Constitution was entered into law on August 26th. So our very last episode ends that day, culminates that day with Jeanette Rankin, who was the first woman to serve in the US Congress and was instrumental in drafting the legislation that became the 19th Amendment.
Thank you.
Seeing those words and being aware of what happened, particularly to the women at Harvard, there wasn't a woman hired onto the faculty in the astronomy department at Harvard until the 1990s. No, one correction. There was one in the 1950s, but after that, it took till the 1990s again. And the one who was hired in the 1950s, I think, was originally paid a quarter of the salary of the men in the department. She was a brilliant woman. But I learned when I got my first position on the scientific staff that I was offered half the salary of the man who was hired at the same time as I got hired. And he was only 2 years my senior. And the only way that I learned about it was that because I was born in Canada and the job had to be advertised by immigration and it had to be posted. And so one by one, many of my colleagues came to my office that afternoon and said, do you realize how little you're being paid? And of course I had no idea, but it was somehow the tradition that you pay women less than men. And I was delighted to get the job. Didn't even occur to me that that was an issue. And that was one of the things I delighted when I became director many years later. I would tell the women, I would give them a salary and they'd say, great. I'd say, no, negotiate with me. You need to learn to negotiate because men do that. And they always did it, but women didn't. We don't learn to do that. We say, yeah, thank you. And so there's still things we can learn.
Yes, I'd like to speak quickly towards the future. I'd really love to see women of color represented more in STEM and have their voices heard. And especially, you know, also in my field, I work with local communities, I work with indigenous communities, and you know, I really want to share my knowledge as a scientist with women from these communities and women who also go on and become scientists, both, you know, in the Caribbean, but also in New York City. And I'm trying to do that. And I think it's very, very important. It's something that we all have to work together for.
Yeah, I strongly, strongly second that.
Great. Pia, was that all of the questions?
Yes, but we have one more question that will end up our Q&A. Charlotte, can you give us one piece of advice to the attendees on the call today on how to make an impact and send us off being our best unladylike selves?
Oh, it seems to have frozen for me. Sorry, it's saying my internet connection is unstable and it froze.
Oh, no,
can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, I'm back. Good. Sorry about that. Do you mind repeating the question? Because you dropped out right then.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So can you give us one piece of advice to the attendees on the call today on how to make an impact and send us off being our best unladylike selves?
Oh, so lovely. Well, I'm going to echo many of the same sentiments that all three of us shared tonight. I think follow your passions. Don't let other people discourage you. If someone says no, find another way. As a filmmaker, often people say it's better to ask for, wait, what's the quote? It's better to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. So just do it, and then clean up the mess after the fact if you need to. So yes, and I wish you all the very best in your lives and your careers. You have a beautiful future ahead of you, and you're so lucky to have project scientists to help guide you along the way.
It's wonderful. Thank you so much for this lively conversation. Thank you, Charlotte, Ina, Wendy, for being here and answering all these questions. And just Project Scientists is, as you all know, a nonprofit organization. So if you liked what you saw tonight, we would appreciate your donations and support at projectscientist.org.
Merci.
And send out links and resources as well. So thank you all for being here tonight. We appreciate it, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much. We'll be in touch about being our STEM superstars this summer.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Okay, Moshi.